There's a quote most people have seen on a motivational poster somewhere. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. People repost it. They put it as their phone wallpaper. They nod along to it in YouTube comment sections. And then they go back to their lives anxious, reactive, controlled by every small thing that happens to them. That's not Stoicism's failure. That's theirs. Marcus Aurelius didn't write Meditations to be quoted. He wrote it at war, literally. He was commanding armies on the northern frontier of the Roman Empire, watching men die, managing a plague that was killing thousands of his citizens, and still finding the time every morning to write notes to himself. Not speeches, not proclamations, notes, private ones, reminders for a man who happened to be the most powerful person on earth, reminding himself not to lose his mind. Nobody was supposed to read it. That's what makes it real, and that's the first thing most people miss. Modern self-help will tell you, believe in yourself, visualize your success, speak your truth. Stoicism tells you something colder. Most of what you want, you won't get. Most of what you fear will happen, and none of that is the point. Epictetus, who was born a slave and died one of the most respected philosophers in Rome, opened his entire life's teaching with the single distinction. He called it the dichotomy of control. Some things are in your power, some things are not. What's in your power? Your judgments, your desires, your response to what happens to you. What's not in your power? Everything else. Your reputation, other people's opinions, whether you succeed, whether you're loved, whether you live or die. Most people hear this and think it sounds depressing, and that reaction, that's exactly why they'll never understand it. Because Epictetus wasn't saying nothing matters. He was saying you've been spending your entire life fighting over things you never had control over in the first place. Every time someone insulted you and you couldn't sleep for 3 days, that was energy spent on something outside your control. Every time you needed someone's approval before you felt okay about yourself, outside your control. Every time you collapsed because a plan didn't work out, you gave power to something that was never yours to command. Stoicism isn't depression. It's the end of a particular kind of suffering. The suffering that comes from pretending you control what you don't. But here's where it gets hard. Accepting this isn't intellectual. You can't just decide to believe it. The Stoics knew this. That's why they practiced every single day. Not because they were naturally calm, but because they weren't. Marcus Aurelius. Again, the man had every possible reason to believe the world revolved around him. Emperor, military commander, son of a god by Roman religious standards. And yet, in his private journal written to nobody, he wrote this. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. He started every day expecting difficulty, not because he was pessimistic, but because he refused to be surprised by human nature. He wanted to meet the world as it was, not as he wished it to be. That discipline, that's what's missing from almost every version of Stoicism sold to people today. Here is the deeper problem. We live in an era that has made comfort the default goal of human life. Not meaning, not virtue, not depth. Comfort. We optimize for frictionless experience. We curate our feeds. We avoid difficult conversations. We mute people who challenge us. We take the path that requires the least discomfort and call it self-care. And then we read a Marcus Aurelius quote and wonder why our lives still feel hollow. Seneca, who was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, a playwright, a statesman, and Nero's personal advisor, which is as dangerous a job as it sounds. Seneca understood this trap better than almost anyone who ever lived. He wrote in a letter to his friend Lucilius, "It is not that I am brave, it is that I know what deserves to be feared." Think about that. Most of what we fear today is not dangerous, it's uncomfortable. There's a difference. Public speaking is uncomfortable. Failure is uncomfortable. Being judged is uncomfortable. But none of it will kill you. None of it is in Stoic terms truly bad. The only thing the Stoics considered genuinely bad was moral failure. Becoming a coward, a liar, someone who abandoned their values for convenience. That was the real loss. Everything else, poverty, illness, Exile, even death, was considered in their framework preferred indifferent. Things you naturally want to avoid, but things that don't touch the core of who you are unless you let them. We flip this completely. We're terrified of discomfort and completely unbothered about character. Someone will endure tremendous anxiety to avoid a difficult conversation, but the cowardice of avoiding that conversation barely registers. Someone will work themselves into exhaustion chasing money or status, but the question of whether that work is actually worth doing, whether it reflects who they want to be, never asked. Stoicism forces that question every single day. What kind of person are you becoming? Not what are you achieving? Not how do people see you? Not what do you own? Who are you becoming? And that's why it's hard, because most people don't actually want to answer that. Let's talk about the specific ways people misread this philosophy because it's worth being precise. The first misreading: Stoicism means being emotionless. It doesn't. This is probably the most common mistake. The Stoics had a word apatheia, which gives us our word apathy. But apatheia didn't mean not caring. It meant freedom from destructive passions, from the emotions that pull you away from reason and virtue. Jealousy, rage, panic, greed. The Stoics fully expected you to feel grief, to feel love, to care deeply. Marcus Aurelius mourned the deaths of his children. He had several who died young. Seneca wrote with extraordinary tenderness about friendship. Epictetus spoke about love in ways that would surprise people who think Stoics are cold. The difference is that the Stoics didn't want your emotions to own you, to make decisions for you, to become your master. There's a line attributed loosely to Epictetus that I think about constantly. He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he is not, but rejoices for those which he has. That's not the absence of feeling, that's a different relationship with feeling. One where you feel fully, but you're not dragged by it. The second misreading: Stoicism is about enduring suffering silently. No, that's a kind of performance, a macho performance. Usually, real Stoic practice isn't about gritting your teeth and pretending nothing hurts. It's about not adding unnecessary suffering on top of what's already real. When something bad happens to you, there's the event itself, and then there's the story you tell about the event, the meaning you give it, the catastrophizing, the replaying, the imagining of how it will affect your future, the resentment. The event is real. Everything after that is construction. And that's where Stoicism does its actual work, not in making you numb, but in cleaning up the noise. The event happened. What now? What's in your power? What matters? Marcus Aurelius called this returning to the task at hand. You grieve, you process, you feel, and then you return to the work, to the people in front of you, to what can actually be done. The third misreading: Stoicism is for strong people. This one is backwards. Stoicism was written by a slave, taught in the marketplace, not the academy, practiced by soldiers, merchants, and emperors alike. It wasn't an elite philosophy. It was practical, street level, designed for people dealing with actual, brutal life. Epictetus lost his freedom. Seneca lost everything he built multiple times. Marcus Aurelius ruled during plague and war and betrayal. These weren't people who had it easy. These were people who developed a system because life demanded it. Stoicism isn't for people who are already strong. It's for people who need to become strong. So if all of this is true, if Stoicism is not about quotes, not about emotional suppression, not about passive endurance, then what is it practically day to day? Let me give you what the Stoics actually did. Not metaphor, actual practice. Morning reflection. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius wrote. Before anything else, he reviewed what the day might bring. He anticipated difficulty. He reminded himself of his values. He prepared his mind before the world got its hands on it. This is not journaling in the Instagram sense. This is more like a soldier checking his equipment before battle, not because he's afraid, but because he respects the fight ahead. The question he asked himself wasn't, what do I want to achieve today? It was, who do I want to be today? And then what will try to pull me away from that, and how will I respond? Try this once. Before your phone, before your coffee, even 5 minutes. Write down one thing that might challenge you today. a person, a task, a situation, and write how a person with your values would handle it. Then go live that negative visualization. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Before something important, they would deliberately imagine it going wrong, not to create anxiety, but to dissolve it, to remove the shock of failure, to find gratitude for what they already had by imagining its absence. Seneca wrote about imagining losing everything, his wealth, his friends, his freedom, not as a nightmare, as a practice, a rehearsal for what life might actually deliver, because it does, it always does. Sooner or later, it takes something. The person who has never imagined losing something is the most fragile person in the room. One real loss, and they shatter. The person who has lived with that possibility, not in dread, but in clear-eyed awareness, they bend, they don't break. Evening review. Seneca's teacher, Sexius, ended every day with 3 questions. Seneca adopted this practice and wrote about it extensively. What bad habit did I curb today? How am I better? Where did I fall short? Not as self-punishment, as data, as honest feedback from the only person whose opinion about your inner life actually matters. You. Most people end their day scrolling, numbing, avoiding the quiet where these questions live. The Stoics sat in that quiet, deliberately, the view from above. Marcus Aurelius had a practice, one he described in Meditations, of pulling back mentally, zooming out, seeing himself from above, then his city, then the empire, then the span of history. A problem that feels enormous at eye level looks different from altitude. He was one of the most powerful people who ever lived, and he reminded himself regularly that his entire empire was a small dot in an incomprehensibly large universe, and that everything he built would eventually be dust, not to despair, but to be released. Released from the need for it all to mean something permanent, from the need to be remembered, from the ego's insistence that this moment is the most important moment in all of time. You can do this too. The next time something feels catastrophic, pull back. How will this look in a year, in 10, in 100? Not to dismiss what you feel, but to find proportion. I want to come back to the title, Why Will Most People Never Understand Stoicism? Not because it's complicated, it's not. A child can understand the dichotomy of control. A teenager can grasp the logic of focusing on what you can change. The reason most people won't understand it, really understand it, not just quote it, is simpler and more uncomfortable than any philosophical complexity. Because to live it, you have to give something up. You have to give up the story that your suffering is someone else's fault. You have to give up the comfort of resentment, of blame, of waiting for the world to change before you do, of letting your past be the explanation for your present. These aren't small things to give up. We hold them tightly. They feel like justice. They feel earned. But the Stoics would say, look at what holding them cost you. Look at what you're trading your life for. Every moment you spend replaying an injustice, you are giving that injustice more of your only irreplaceable resource, time. Not to the person who wronged you. They're not even there. You're giving it to a memory, a mental construction, a ghost. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that I think is the most quietly devastating line in all of Meditations. How much more damage anger and grief do to us than the things that caused them? Read that again. He's not saying the things that hurt you aren't real. He's saying your response to them, prolonged, habitual, unconscious, does more damage than the original event ever did. That's a hard thing to sit with because it means the continued suffering after the original wound is ours. Not given to us, chosen. Unconsciously, yes. Habitually, yes, but chosen. And the moment you see that, you can't unsee it. That's the moment Stoicism stops being a philosophy you read about and starts being something you practice. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD on a military campaign. The empire he spent his life stabilizing began to fracture not long after. Everything he built crumbled eventually. The cities he governed, dust. What remained was the journal he wrote to nobody, and what it said across nearly 2,000 years was this: you don't need the world to cooperate. You don't need circumstances to be kind. You don't need people to understand you or appreciate you or treat you fairly. You need only to be who you've decided to be in every moment, regardless of what the moment contains. That's it. That's the whole thing. Not a quote, not a poster, not a morning routine you try for 2 weeks and abandon. A decision renewed every morning, tested every day, refined over a lifetime. Most people won't do it, but you're still here, which means something. If this resonated, not in the way that feels good, but in the way that feels true, then stay. There's more to explore here, not just Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, Co., the full tradition of people who looked at the chaos of human life and decided to meet it with clarity. That's what this channel is, modern Stoicism. We'll see you in the next video.